For antiwar.com and Chaos Radio 95.9 FM in Austin, Texas, I'm Scott Horton. This is Anti-War Radio. Introducing Dr. Rand Paul, son of Dr. Ron Paul, and in fact a doctor in his own right, a surgeon, I believe it is. And he announced last night on the Rachel Maddow show the creation of an exploratory committee to look at running as a Republican for the U.S. Senate in 2010. Very interesting news, and here to discuss his plans and his views, Dr. Rand Paul. Welcome to the show, sir. How are you doing?
Good to be with you, Scott.
Well, I'm happy to have you here, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but I'll go ahead and tell you, your dad is the only politician I like. And
that's a pretty small group, then, of politicians.
Yeah, I really don't like politicians very much at all. And no offense to you, I'm half the man my father is. So I don't know if I should really expect that you're as good as him on all the issues, but I sure would like to find out. You got to be better than most.
Fire away. We're ready for you.
All right. Well, first of all, why don't you just tell us what you think are the most important issues facing this country? What kind of things do you think will be your top priorities in the U.S. Senate were you to attain that position?
I think right now the economy seems to be dominating the issues. A year or two ago it was the Iraq War, but now I think it's the economy that dominates things. I think the two are interrelated in the sense that part of the reason we're bankrupt as a country is, fighting so many foreign wars and having so many military bases around the world. But I think right now the predominant thing that people are concerned about is the economy. I think the deficit is spiraling upwards. I think it threatens really our economy in a way bigger than some have even mentioned so far, in the sense that I think it's not just future generations that will pay for the deficit. I think we all may be paying for the deficit very soon through higher prices and through inflation. And I actually think we could get 1979 or worse.
Now, I know that your father has been interested in and really an expert in Austrian school economics for decades and decades. Have you been learning this stuff all along as well? Are you anywhere near the expert on this kind of discussion as your father is?
I don't want to claim to be an expert on it, but I'd say I'm a pretty well-read layman. I've read most of von Mises's work, a lot of Rothbard's works, Henry Hazlitt, a lot of the free market economists I'm very familiar with. I'm familiar with the arguments for the marketplace, and I think I can articulate the arguments and the defense of the marketplace that's necessary to create a political coalition to win a race.
Mm-hmm. But would any of your constituents have reason to fear that you're going to start sounding like a Chicago school supply sider because that's kind of sort of free market enough, or are you really about the individualist theory behind Austrian economics?
No, I would say that would more accurately describe me. Definitely, I've been a follower not only of the Austrians, but was a fan of Ayn Rand growing up, and so I think the ideas and the concepts of individualism are something I don't take as something that we compromise, and something that is very important that, it's sort of the origin of our political philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Well, and now what about that cost of empire? You talked about the economy being the most important issue, and, of course, the enormous expense. $1 trillion a year is the number that your father often cites. I think his footnote being Robert Higgs there at the Independent Institute, that is spent on maintaining this world empire. In order to try to shore up the economy, is rolling back the empire not the first order of business?
Yeah, I think they're interrelated, and I also think they become the political coalition you need in order to win a race, basically, because there are people from the left who acknowledge the vast expenditure of the military-industrial complex. There are some on the right that are beginning to understand that, but it's really this sort of right-left paradigm that you bring these groups together in order to try to win an election. And I think it is coming, and I think for many years we had Republicans who simply said, let's just cut off the welfare queen and we'll balance the budget. Well, realistically, you can't balance the budget. There's not enough money spent in welfare at the federal level to balance your budget. Is there some welfare you could cut? Yeah, but really there's a lot of welfare warfare, corporatism, and money that's being given at a high level to corporations that needs to be reformed. And I think that is a place you start. One of the things that I think my father doesn't talk much about, but I will be talking about some, and I think he would not disagree, but he just doesn't tend to talk about it as much, is that I think we need to reform the way money corrupts politics. And there were attempts made at this, but most of these attempts trampled on the First Amendment, like McCain-Feingold. But I think there are ways to reform the way money corrupts politics by, when you dole out federal contracts, I would make a rule or a law that says when you dole out a contract that's worth more than $1 million, or, for example, Halliburton had $1 billion no-bid contract, make it part of the contract, a clause that they voluntarily accept that they will not lobby government during the terms of their contract, that they will not give PAC contributions during the terms of their contract. And I think you can get some of the abuse that money brings into the system without infringing on the First Amendment, but by telling people, look, you want a contract, you got to go by the stipulations of the federal contract.
Mm-hmm. Well, and now that sounds like a reasonable approach. I think your father's position has basically been what we need is a bunch of people who have as much integrity as him, who, as the Washington Post notes, the lobbyists don't bother Ron Paul in the Houses of Congress because they know he's just going to say, I'm sorry, I don't have any authority to give you a bunch of money at everybody else's expense. And so they don't even bother because he is basically incorruptible. And yet you hint at the problem there, the corruption of money in politics. It seems like if there's only been one Ron Paul in Congress that I can find all this time, there's every reason to suspect you, sir, of being the kind of person like every other politician except him before you, who would in fact have to sell out some of his principles in order to obtain power. Are you immune from those kinds of pressures the way your father is?
Yeah, and I think people can only come to believe that by hearing you speak and by seeing your message and seeing what you put out in the written word. And obviously I believe that in the sense that, you know, I'm not going up to compromise to get elected. I'm not going up to say things or provide various goodies or special interest with various contracts in order to get elected. I think we have serious problems, and I wouldn't bother leaving my state, my family, my practice, everything else to go to Washington if I thought it was only to get ahead in a personal way. So, I think the believability on that, it takes people time to do that. But I think it's also, you hint on the fact also that, you know, if there's one politician in the last decade that you believe had any integrity, that's also why you need some rules to restrain the rest of the mess up there. And one reason why I think some rules to restrain the corruption of money are necessary, because until we elect, 218 Ron Pauls, we need a way to try to restrain the rest of the crowd.
Mm. Well, and as he often says, I guess it was Harry Brown's old phrase, it's not so much the abuse of power, it's the power to abuse. And isn't that really the problem that we face, Dr. Paul, is that the Congress has virtually no limit on its authority, the President either. And so as long as they can take as much money from us as they want or create as much of it as they want and spend it on providing favors to constituencies around the country, we're basically in the iron grip of this money corruption.
Right, and I think you're exactly right. We at one time were a constitutional republic where we had restraints, and now we're much more of a pure democracy, and this is kind of what many of the founding fathers feared. Jefferson, called a democracy nothing more than a mob rule where 51% get to decide what 49% have in rights. And that's the problem. We had a great acceleration of this in the 1930s when the Commerce Clause came to mean almost everything. One of the worst cases that opened the door was in 1942. You have Wickard v. Filburn, and a guy wants to grow some wheat on his land in California, and they say, well, no, just consuming your own wheat on your land, that could be qualified as interstate commerce because you chose not to sell it on the interstate market. But from those decisions, we kept widening and widening, and now we have sort of the Gonzales v. Reich decision where they say California wants to allow medical marijuana, and the federal government comes in and says, oh, no, that defies the Commerce Clause also because that marijuana looks like other marijuana that could be sold interstate So therefore, even though you're growing it, your own plants, and using it for medicinal uses,